Thanks for your patience. We're in the home stretch for today, so have a little more caffeine. It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator for this panel, Emily West, who I first encountered when she was at the Innocence Project. And it is the Innocence Project. It's not the Innocence Project in New York. It is the Innocence Project, who I have a lot of contact with in general with my work for the National Registry of Exonerations. She is now a senior research associate at City University of New York for State Institute for State and Local Governance, and as part of that, she's working with the Safety and Justice Challenge. She can tell you a little bit more about that, but she's working directly with 5 of the projects. And it was sort of a serendipitous moment that we crossed paths earlier this year, and it was like, well, what are you doing, and what are you doing? And she's mentioned this, and what she was doing, and I said, perfect, this is going to be a perfect fit. What do you think we should do? And we started talking about different possibilities, and the idea kind of out of this conversation was, how about bringing the major stakeholders in one of these jurisdictions to come in? And you're going to get, this is kind of a rare occasion that you as journalists won't, it would be highly unusual that you would get all the people involved in your jurisdiction on something like this on the same stage to ask questions. So I think it was, the judge said that they can be the test dummies for your questions. And so I'm going to turn over to Emily, who's going to introduce the panel. I think this is a unique sort of gathering and a great opportunity. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start by just thanking Stephen and Maurice for inviting us to participate in this really important fellowship program, and we really look forward to seeing all the great work from you guys that come out of this. No pressure, of course. So I thought before introducing the panel and getting started that it might make sense to, many of you might be familiar with the Safety and Justice Challenge, but I thought I'll just take a minute to kind of briefly talk about the initiative itself and our role in it. So if you want to just pull up that. And then just go to that first slide, the next one. I'm not used to having to tell someone else to do this. You can see it in a minute, but overall, the goal of this initiatives, as we will see in a second, are to advance fair and effective policies and practices across the criminal justice system with the aim at reducing the jail population, but also reducing the racial disparities that exist within that population, while, of course, always preserving public safety for the community. And while, all of these, there's jurisdictions that are funded at the local level, the hope is that it'll have a national impact as well once they're done. Next slide. So this just gives you a sense. There's currently 20 implementation sites that are receiving substantial funding from the foundation to sort of implement ambitious strategies across different criminal justice system points to reduce their jail populations. And as you can see from this map, it's national in scope, and it covers smaller jurisdictions like Lucas County, and also really large ones such as Harris County in Texas. And then in the next slide, you can see that they're also funding an additional 20 sites that are receiving smaller grants that are called Innovation Fund sites, and some of those will also become full implementation sites themselves very soon. And next slide. So for all of these sites that have received funding, they have sort of experts in the field at their disposal to help them support as they try to reduce their jail populations. And I'm not going to go through all of them here, but I just wanted to give you a sense of all the organizations that are there in the collaborative effort of this initiative, and the support that the sites are getting from all of these various organizations, some of which are here today. So that's it for my slides, but just to sort of explain a little bit more about what ISLG's role is that we're really largely there to collect case level data from all the implementation sites and develop performance measures that are sort of tracking their progress towards meeting the goals of the initiative. And so each site comes up with these strategies at different system points, and we are collecting the data and then providing performance measures that speak to the progress that they're making along the way for both the foundation and the sites themselves to see throughout the funding period. And as Maurice mentioned, I have the pleasure of working with Lucas County in this capacity, and today I'm pleased to welcome some of their key criminal justice stakeholders to discuss their recent and continuing success in reducing their local jail population through their participation in this initiative and beyond. The goal of this panel is to provide all of you with sort of a concrete example of how a jurisdiction can execute real change and the challenges and successes that they've experienced along the way. So I think the way we're organizing this is everybody's going to kind of talk at the same time, not at the same time, but not one after the other. So we have...
It's a conversation.
It's a conversation. So we have Judge Jean Zmuda here from the Lucas County's Court of Common Pleas. We have Holly Matthews, who's the Executive Director of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. And we have Sheriff John Tharp of Lucas County as well. So we'll get started.
All right. Could we pull up the PowerPoint, please? And that means we need to dim the lights one more time. I guess I'll get started. Well, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here and to be participating in this excellent conference. I will tell you, I've been a judge for 15 years, and I have to say, I've been sitting at that table since 9 o'clock this morning. It's the longest period of time in 15 years as a judge I've not said something. Pretty good, huh, Sharice? All right, very good. Anyway, but here's a great opportunity for you. You're all fledgling journalists. Well, you are journalists. You're fledgling to be Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists, right? And so here's a great opportunity for you to develop some of these skills that you're learning today and tomorrow were your test case, as Maurice indicated. We want to have a conversation because what you'll learn is our process has been and will continue to be a collaborative effort. It's one of the things that we've taken from, and why I think as a community we are as successful as we've been in implementing certain criminal justice reform efforts. As we talk with you, if you have questions, let's not wait till the end. I don't mind being interrupted, neither does Holly or the good sheriff. I think it helped with the flow of the conversation. So if you ever have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and we'll try to respond to them. All right? Want me to take the first slide?
Go for it.
So, as all good stories are, our story starts with this gentleman seated to my right, Sheriff Tharp. In 1976, the current jail that houses 405 defendants had a federal court order which said thou shalt not have more than 368 people in your jail. We've been under that federal court order since 1976. It's the longest continuous serving federal court case for overcrowding jail situation in the country. I suspect not a single one of you are even around in 1976, other than maybe Maurice. All right? So when Sheriff Tharp became sheriff, shortly after that he said, enough is enough, and he says, we need a new jail. And it's that simple demand, as the elected official in Lucas County say, we need a new jail, that really began this journey that we as a community have been on since 2014.
And Sheriff, do you want to provide some context on our jail?
Yeah, so our jail, it was built in 1977, and it's never been really taken care of. maintained like you would maintain your home. You buy a home, you fix the roof. If you think it's going to start leaking, you fix it before it starts leaking. So our pipes are breaking, the roof is leaking, the elevators are breaking. So we know it's going to be a couple $1 million just for new elevators. It's going to be very, very expensive just to get it updated to where it should be. It's not humane for the inmates. We were the first ones to say it's not humane. But you know what? It's not humane for the employees either. So we have employees, my concern too, not only the inmates, is that we have employees that have been sentenced to 8 to 12 hours a day there for 5 days a week for 30 years. So they're doing 30 years in our jail. That is an absolute cesspool. So with that cesspool, then we talked to the county commissioners. The county commissioners, I give them their kudos. They agreed to come over, spend the night in jail. We let them out the next day. We did. We let them out. So they came, spent the night in jail and visited with us. But go right ahead, Judge.
One of them had been there previously.
He was, yeah. And should have been.
In another life.
Released.
But anyway, so being prudent stewards of the taxpayer dollars, we as a community, the commissioners did this. They said, okay, well, how big should the jail be? And then once you ask that question, it just opens up. I like the woman who was just seating here. It just opens up all these other questions. Well, that depends. What does the jail consist of? It was built in the 70s at a time when that single facility housed all pretrial defendants and all sentenced misdemeanors, okay? Today, it now is a pretrial detention facility only, and it shuffles in, what is it, 80%, Sheriff? Mm-hmm. The turnover daily is about 70%. So the only ones who are housed there are those being held pretrial because they couldn't make their bond, awaiting trial, okay? It's no longer a sentence facility. And the reality is become not a jail in the historical context. I prefer calling it a correction center because a criminal justice center, I mean, because it recognizes there are 2 floors, no, actually a floor and a half for the medical unit where we do detoxing of people that are overdosing, trying to deal with, and on a daily basis, there's about 60% of the population that have mental health issues.
Yeah, jump in there for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Judge. So I wanted to jump in for a second because this is where you come in as journalists. At this time, I was new elected a sheriff. I'd never been a sheriff before. Right now I have 47 years in law enforcement, but my background was in as a grunt, as a street officer. So I'd worked like 14 years in a narcotics squad, 7 years in a homicide squad, and the rest of my term with the Toledo Police Department at that time, and the rest of it was with the gang unit. So after coming with the sheriff's office, is that when I became sheriff, is that the media picked up on it, and thank God the media did pick up on it, because if it wasn't for you, we would never be where we're at today. And so I received a call from our local newspaper, the Toledo Blade, and they said, Sheriff, would you come over and talk with the editors? And I'm thinking, I've never been an elected official, and I do have to tell you, it made me a little nervous to go over and talk to the editors. And so over I go by myself, and there was 6 of them, and so they invited me to sit down, and they said, well, Sheriff, we hear, and we know, and you've said you want to build a new jail. And I said, yes, that's true. And they said to me, well, explain to us, and they all have their pen out and ready and staring, and explain to us exactly how you're going to do that. And I thought for a second, and I looked at him, and I said, I don't have a clue. I have never built anything in my entire life. I said, but you know what? We did my wife and I, we built a home, and she didn't let me have anything to do with building that home, so I don't have a clue of how to build a jail. I said, but I know people that do. There's people that built the Huntington Center in Lucas County. There's people that built other huge facilities in our building. So I know people that do know how to do that, so I will get with them and let them teach us how to build that. Judge, go right ahead.
So as a county, we hired consultants. They studied the existing jail. They looked at our current criminal justice processes in Lucas County, made certain recommendations about how large this new jail should be. And one of the most significant suggestions, they said, is before you make the decision on that number, you really should update your bail bond tool. We had been utilizing a tool for, well, since the mid-'60s, the old Brooklyn tool, I think is what they called it. Vera point scale, 0 to 16, correct. Which is, I think, the first bail bond tool that was ever created. And it's the only tool we ever knew. And I'm serving as an administrative judge for the Common Pleas Court. I'm thinking like, what? There's other bail bond tools besides this, the gospel that we've always used? So we went, and that's how we got connected with the Arnold Foundation. The Arnold Foundation allowed us to be one of their early implementation sites for their PSA, which is a risk-based tool, as opposed to a charge-based tool that we had before. And then that just began this process after process. We applied for the MacArthur grant. We were fortunate enough to be selected as one of the sites from the MacArthur challenge, safety challenge, and we've been there for 2 years. We're in the process of reapplying for an additional 2 years. And it's the process of what we've learned in trying to plan what kind of criminal justice reforms, and that's the last bullet point on this slide, which was how can we reduce jail population, pretrial jail population in Lucas County. Our target was 15 to 18%, and Holly, who's as the executive director, is in charge of all the data of Lucas County.
And I am happy to report that through our first 2 years of implementation, we have exceeded the goals set forth to us by the Safety and Justice Challenge. So we are, I believe, about 22 to 24% reduction. I have the concrete number in upcoming slides. And I would say that as far as justice reform efforts go, we are just getting started. We are at the beginning phases of some of our innovative programs, and we hope to see even more reductions as we move forward. And actually, we set a much more ambitious goal for ourselves in our continuation application because we know we can do better, and we know that we can do better while still maintaining public safety and providing the appropriate services to our community.
Next slide. So that just tells us what the Safety and Justice Challenge is.
And you can go to the next slide. And I believe Emily already covered the overview of the competition, so we'll move on to the next slide. And we already talked about our challenge number.
So one of the first things that we did, actually, and I think it's really the best thing that any community that is looking at this needs to do, is we sat down and tried to understand what does the Lucas County criminal justice system look like? Because you've heard the speakers this morning were talking about it. It's barely a system, right? It's extremely siloed, and yes, sir.
I was wondering if you can give us some basic background on Lucas County, the population.
Oh, sure.
Just to give us a context.
Yes, so our population for the county is right around 430,000. We have our major city, which is the city of Toledo. City of Toledo's population is about 280,000. When you look at numbers, city of Toledo really does compensate for the bulk of our arrests and the bulk of our criminal justice activity. Our jail capacity, we have the Lucas County Corrections Center, which is primarily our pretrial facility. Under the federal court order, we must maintain a population of 403 individuals at 3 p.m. every day. If we're above 403, I believe we have an administrative release policy that the sheriff's office executes so that we will maintain a 403 number. And with that 403 number, we also have a capacity to maintain 65 individuals in booking. We also have our sentence facility, which is called the Corrections Center of Northwest Ohio. It's actually a regional jail. I believe some of the other presenters mentioned regional jails earlier today. It's about a 45-minute drive to Stryker, Ohio. And our capacity at CCNO is 303. And one interesting, 305?
275 now.
Oh, 275. I had old numbers.
Yeah.
And so one interesting thing about sort of our progress through the Safety and Justice Challenge, One of our kind of big wins in this has been policy decisions, and there has been a decision to reduce our contracted beds at the CCNO facility. So we have steadily decreased our contracted bed rate, our contracted bed days. So we are effectively eliminating our sentence population. And as we'll discuss further, we have put some practices into place to provide safeguards for judges as we're reducing our sentence population.
If I could, to give the flavor of the county is that, so we have approximately 11 different communities in our county. We have a lot of police departments. Fortunately, we all get along extremely well. We meet on a regular basis, all the way from the heads of the police department, myself, the heads of the park rangers, the state highway patrol, the prosecutor. So we have a regular meetings that we meet on a regular basis, and to help each other because we can't go alone. So I'm happy to share that.
So our court system is 10 felony judges, of which I again serve as the administrative judge currently, and then we have 10 misdemeanor judges. So they'll handle misdemeanor cases as well as civil cases under $15,000. We handle all felony jurisdictional cases, and we came together and said, okay, if we're going to look at this issue of reducing pretrial jail days, how do we accomplish that? And before we could answer that question and select the strategies that we submitted to MacArthur that allowed us to become a site community, we had to understand the system. We had to talk to the disparate parts. So and everyone's elected official. All judges are elected, the sheriff's elected, the commissioners are elected, our county prosecutor's elected, our mayor of the city of Toledo is elected. And we literally came into a large room, and we sat down, and we understood the entire process from pre-arrest. So when that law enforcement officer stops Maurice on the street and has to make a decision. What do I do with Maurice? Do I take him into custody? Do I send him home? Do I take him to a rescue crisis center because he's displaying some aberrant behavioral problems and take him to emergency room? That's pre-arrest all the way through post-disposition. Once the case is concluded, the sentence is finished. And how are the connecting points in reducing or increasing if the person is in custody and not in custody? And who are the deciders? Who makes those decisions depending on where you are along the criminal justice path? And it's the first time that any of us, because as the felony judge, I don't handle cases until an indictment occurs. So it's an actual case pending in my court. And if I sentence them to prison, then I don't deal with that case again unless they ask me for some relief. I don't touch the cases in first appearance cases because that's misdemeanor jurisdiction. The decisions they make, though, in that misdemeanor court impact what happens here, because those judges, if they set a bond that exceeds the amount for which the individual could be released, end up becoming a resident in the sheriff's hotel. So as we learned who makes what decisions about whether they're in custody or not, we then use the PSA tool to give judges more information, because that's really what because it's a risk-based tool, the PSA tool, it allows judges to make a more informed decision. For the first time, it's an evidence-based tool that allows a consideration of factors for failure to appear, as well as recidivism factors, which are statutorily and constitutionally the two criteria that we as judges in Ohio must consider in the setting of bail. And so we start this bail movement before it's become the really big movement that exists now, I think. And now all of Ohio is considering bail reform. And it's really interesting because we have conservative legislators on the right who think, well, let's just adopt the PSA tool, because if you adopt the PSA tool, you'll kick out all these people and we can save millions of dollars. And then we have individuals, progressives on the left, who want to kick out everyone because they don't want anyone in jail ever, right? Or at least that's what they think. And both of them are pushing the state to adopt a PSA tool, which misses the mark completely. And when I got my community, when we got the community to accept Lucas County adopting the PSA tool, people would ask and say, Judge, can you predict that if we adopt this tool and abide by the recommendations that you're going to reduce jail population? I said, I can't do that. I said, I know what will happen. We will right-size the jail. We will have the most informed decision about the people, the Maurices that come into the facility. Should they remain there or not, based on validated risk consideration? We used to say when we first talked about this, we want to detain Maurice not because we're mad at him for having committed an offense, but because we're afraid of him, that he won't show up or he'll do something bad if released. And that's what happened. I mean, it's fortunate that we have reduced significantly the number of people that are held pretrial, which is how we're able to maintain that 403 number. And despite that, we've reduced our FTAs, failure to appear rates, as well as recidivism rates. Yes, ma'am.
Does this PSA tool factor in social relationships? Because one of the things that I've heard before is that, if you live on the same block as a gangster disciple, you're considered associated even though you might never actually have an association other than a cousin or something like that. Does that account for?
It does not. Okay. And one of the beauties of the PSA from the court's perspective, it is race and gender neutral. It doesn't take into account in the scoring. It takes into account 9 questions, the answers to which the combination of give you of a validated factor about the risks that are appropriate for pretrial release. And again, this is a narrow issue because remember, everyone is presumed innocent. So if someone is just charged with an offense, they haven't been convicted of anything. All right. The social issue, okay, and background and whether they have ties to the community, employment, education, those factors which a lot of communities still use as primary factors in determining bail decisions and release mechanisms, we still consider those, but those are after we make a decision about release. So the release is made using the risk factor tools and the PSA score, as well as we had to tweak it a little bit because the PSA doesn't allow consideration of juvenile records. Ohio is one of the few states, I think there's a minority of states now that permit courts to consider the juvenile record of a defendant in the establishing of bail. So so we have that attached as well. We also have a biographical sheet so they can tell us. It's all self-reporting, but they say if they have substance abuse issues or if they have mental health issues, are they connected? Also, whether or not they are a veteran. Because of the connection that could be established with the Veterans Office, all right? And those are all used then after we decide if someone's going to be released on their own recognizance and what ties back or not.
And one thing I do want to add here, part of the Safety and Justice Challenge was really driven by data. Lucas County is very fortunate that we have a very robust integrated information sharing system. So I believe the question came up about the number of individuals on parole. Fortunately, if you were a reporter in our jurisdiction, there's a lot of information that can be had as a result of this integrated justice system. And so when we were pulling numbers and looking through numbers and looking at these decision points, and I will add a caveat to this, this is a very stripped down, plain version of our system map. If you would actually look at the true system map, you would see arrows going in and out of these squares all over the place. And it's too hard to read on a PowerPoint presentation. And so the system is complex, and understanding the numbers to go with the system is very complex. And part of the challenge for us is how to talk about our system with the media and have it make sense. Because a lot of those terms we use may mean something to us, they're terms of art, but to the general public, we're still up against jail versus prison, where we're talking pre-trial versus post-sentence, Lucas County Correction Center versus CCNO. It gets very muddy and very confusing. So we need to do a good job at talking about what it is we do. But I think as reporters, you need to understand your system and your community so you can accurately portray the information that you're gathering. Next slide, please.
So we developed these strategies, and these are the strategies that we submitted to MacArthur, And these are our strategies that we have implemented, some completely, others partially, but all are going forward with the support of MacArthur, but quite frankly, will continue past MacArthur, because that's how we're viewing it. These aren't just strategies that will, because we've received dollars from MacArthur to help begin or implement, that once the MacArthur funding ends, that will go back to some other practice.
And I will say that one thing the Safety and Justice Challenge has enabled us to do is really leverage their investment and actually build upon that existing investment. So it's really hard trying to prepare presentations right now where we talk about the Safety and Justice Challenge, because each strategy we have about 5 more caveats of other funding streams, other funding sources, and other initiatives that are going on, and we could be here for hours. Next slide, please. Strategy 1 is our pre-arrest deflection strategy. And so what we're really trying to do is prevent individuals from coming into the jail in the first place. And so as you'll see, I just tried to provide some quick references on each strategy, and if you are interested in these slides, we're happy to provide them. So we have worked with the Center for Court Innovation on developing a deflection/diversion program. As I mentioned earlier, there are definitely terms of art. Deflection in the current world is a pre-arrest program where you're preventing individuals from going to jail in the first place. It's usually used in law enforcement setting. Diversion happens at the point of court, usually at arraignment, and you're preventing you're getting rid of the charges that have already been filed. So we've worked with the Center for Court Innovation to develop an innovative 4-hour curriculum grounded in elements of procedural justice. And one thing you'll see throughout our strategies is really this theme of procedural justice throughout the system. We want a community that values everyone's opinions and perceptions, and it just was really the groundwork from which we worked from. And so the deflection component of this program, the way it will work, we're anticipating that it will be implemented earlier next year, because there are other sort of projects that go part and parcel with this, is that if an individual is picked up for, say, we are looking at 3 targeted offenses: possession of drugs, disorderly conduct, obstructing official business. So if a law enforcement encounters someone in those 3 instances, and that is their most serious charge, they will have this opportunity to complete this 4-hour class. If they complete it within 30 days, no charges will be filed in court. They can go on their merry way. This is really targeting the repeat offenders of our system. We want to break that revolving door. And as I mentioned, this is really a data-driven process. We arrived at these 3 charges looking at data. We know that these charges are our most frequent charges in Toledo Municipal Court. We know that there are high levels of disparity, and if we can prevent individuals, especially minorities in our system, from going into jail, we can start working on the disparities in our system. Also, we learned that oftentimes, 50% of the time, these charges were dismissed during their court process. So why put them in jail, have them in jail pending their court hearing, when ultimately half of these charges are going to be dismissed? Next slide, please. And to, yeah.
Yep.
About that. And that, my question on that is, when you look at charges dismissed, are any of this a comment on the actual arrests that were made? And how does this get on the street level where the arrests are made? Does this have any kind of impact there, or is it all sort of, because some of this is pre-arrest, how does that get implemented with police, I guess?
Well, what's interesting is this idea comes from our law enforcement. Actually, the chief of police of the city of Toledo is the one that said his officers would love to have something pre-arrest so that they don't have to take everyone to the jail first, okay? I think since we're not quite fully implemented with strategy one, I think we will see something within the community, a reaction to that. All right, because there is this sense that if you're going to get charged with one, you're going to get charged with 3 or 4 charges. That's the practice that has occurred, and I think with this deflection program, once it's implemented, you're going to see a change in the way the officers are charging, and maybe have a more concise charging methodology than what they. How's that for being carefully weeding, right?
And the second part of this strategy is really looking at the behavioral health components of our system. And so we're working to develop a deflection center for individuals with behavioral health needs. And the thought is to have this serve as yet another resource for law enforcement where they can take an appropriate individual when it's warranted to a deflection center instead of jail. And kind of the holdup for implementation of our targeted offense deflection is that we need a place that officers feel comfortable taking someone if they need to remove that person from the scene. So if you have a disorderly conduct intox, you're not comfortable leaving the intoxicated individual on the scene and saying, hey, go complete a program in 30 days, we'll see ya. And so it's been, working through this has been interesting to see how to make it work. And we're still having those ongoing discussions.
With law enforcement, I would like to mention that across the country, some people have thought law enforcement would not want to operate that way. The real reality in our county, and I think many counties throughout the country, the law enforcement responding to a situation where the person is mentally ill, they would much rather take them somewhere and where they would be able to get help as opposed to arresting them, placing them into a jail, and then those individuals getting out immediately, and the officers responding again the second time for that person, or the third time in one night. That happens in an 8-hour shift, is where officers will respond 2-3 times on the same person and continue to take them to jail. So this is an alternative for the officers.
Are you guys just talking about a drunk tank?
It is that and more. Okay, so it is where somebody can sleep it off if they're, but it's not a booking facility, it's not incarceration, all right? And oftentimes that individual who's taken to the drunk tank might, that the alcohol might be masking mental health issues, and that could arise once the person sobers up. So they're allowed to hold them 12 hours and by then have that understanding to see if you need to engage them with mental health providers, which is part of the other goal that we would have, okay? Sharice?
So I have a question that I wanted to ask at this moment, because as part of our kind of overarching communication strategy around pretrial reform in places that have successfully done this work on the juvenile side, it's really great in stories that reporters are doing to draw the connections for the community between the successful efforts that have been undertaken in juvenile justice reform in places that have already been through that process. And I know Ohio is a juvenile detention alternatives initiative state. And so I don't know, and so here, could you talk a little bit about whether or not this notion of kind of the assessment center, for lack of to use the juvenile word, was part of the community's already understanding that this front-end deflection work is something that the community had already engaged in thinking about juvenile justice reform?
I will say, being from a smaller community and a community that has a lot of pre-existing relationships, definitely pulling from the juvenile justice reform efforts drove a lot of our strategies and a lot of discussions. Actually, Judge Cubbin was a part of several of our groups and discussions on our adult criminal justice reforms. She's always there offering her support and guidance.
She's one of our juvenile judges,
Yes.
Judge Covenant.
And we do have an assessment center for the juvenile setting. So this is a concept that our law enforcement officers are already comfortable with, have seen in action. They have a card. They know what to do. They know how to do it. They know what it looks like. And so it's really just expanding and building upon that groundwork built by the juvenile system. And we have had a lot of success with our juvenile justice reforms, which I think has definitely helped us pursue this work.
And this is just not one department. This is all the departments and all the law enforcement agencies throughout the entire county.
Next slide, please.
So strategy 2 is managing based on risk. I've already talked a little bit about that the notion of whether or not somebody would be released from custody after their arrest using a validated risk tool. But that's just the beginning, because once you decide that Maurice is not really a threat to the community or himself, and therefore shall be released pending whatever happens in the case, what do we do with him? And this is, to me, this is really fascinating because, and I think Charisse hit a little bit about this in her presentation this morning. It's very clear the more connections we have to Maurice as a court, all right, the more likely we can cause him to fail. So just like if Maurice is not criminally minded, 2 days in jail can make him more criminally minded, which is one of the arguments and one of the rationales, I think, that to do that assessment, to make the determination, we want to right-size the detention facility. We want to remove the Maurices that find themselves being booked as quickly as we can. But once they're released, we also don't want to overmanage him. All right, and therefore, what we are developing, and I think what communities are struggling with, because there's not as much research on this, at least that I've been able to find, and that is, what's the right mix? What's the right touch for Maurice? Is it just, Maurice, you have a court date in 2 weeks, here's your date, we'll see you then? Is it, give us your cell phone and we're going to text you a reminder call? Is it a call itself? Is it requiring him to call? Is it electronic monitoring, the anchor bracelet? Is it that he has to come to the office? We've developed a risk analysis of everyone that's placed on their own recognizance, and then based on that risk score, the connections that we as a court make with the defendant go up the higher the risk level is. And it's a graduated such that if Maurice is charged with a felony and it's a low-level F5, say receiving stolen property, right? Takes 90 days to process by the time indictment through disposition in our court average, okay? If he's comes in as a high risk initially OR because he's had a prior record, had some FTAs in his history, but he does splendidly while having his case pending in front of Judge Zmuda, that risk level will go down, as well as his connections through our pretrial services. All right, that's what I mean by right-sizing the jail and implementing strategies to manage that population.
Next slide, please. And this slide really just shows some of our success using the tool. So and I believe this was first year of implementation of the PSA, and Judge Zmuda referenced this earlier. And I would say these numbers are pretty staggering. Through the implementation of the PSA tool, our failure to appear rate was decreased by 30%. At the same time, those released new criminal activity was also decreased by 50%, and new violent criminal activity rates were reduced by 44%. So that means we are keeping a safe community. And I will say that one of our goals throughout this process is right-sizing our system to maintain community safety and the appropriate size of our jail population.
Next slide. This just shows the level of using electronic monitoring. So this is also interesting because there's more and more data that suggests electronic monitoring isn't as all that it's cracked up to be. And I think there are some judges, in fact, I know there are some judges. The older the judge is, typically the more likely they begrudgingly will accept releasing somebody on their own recognizance because they've always held that F5, right? That's just what you do. It's a felony. It's a serious offense. We should hold them, right? Because they've always done that. They don't want to understand the science behind the cost of over-incarcerating somebody who shouldn't be incarcerated for a nonviolent felony offense. So they split the baby by putting them on the tether. And I was just having a conversation with Charisse on a break here about that's at least half a, I'm going to mix my metaphor, that's at least half a loaf, okay, splitting the baby, right? Because at least the person isn't in custody. I understand they're not free. There still is considerable restrictions depending if it's house arrest, EM, or just what GPS only is what we call it. And that are those kind of cases, for example, a domestic violence defendant. So for us to see it would be a felony domestic violence in Ohio is somebody who has been convicted of a misdemeanor domestic violence offense, or it can be an F5 felony if the victim was pregnant at the time of the assault, in which case it's by operational law. All right, so that person could be on electronic monitoring. We have judges who, because everything is now GPS in terms of electronic monitoring, do you all know how it works? You're all familiar with EM, right? Units. So you can create zones of inclusion and zones of exclusion. Most recently, I had a colleague who put a DV defendant on EM. Zone of exclusion was the Michigan line. And Toledo and Lucas County sits right on the Michigan border, all right? In fact, it's our largest bedroom community. The victim was residing up in Michigan just north of the state line. So the zone of exclusion was he can't leave Lucas County. And so it was GPS only. And then what happens is if he would go up to Michigan, the bracelet would go off, real-time entry to our EM officers, 24-hour operation, and notification to the victim that the defendant is in violation and has crossed the state line, for them to then take whatever precautions. It's only happened once in 4 years that I'm aware of that we've had to use this notification system. But that's a way of protecting that alleged victim, and hopefully not escalating what was already a tense situation, which resulted in the original charge.
All right, next slide, please. The next 3 slides are various dashboards we've developed to share information that we've talked about. And so this first dashboard is how we share PSA results. This is available to judges real time on their bench so they can manage information. And I think we have a question back in the corner.
My name's Eric. I'm a freelancer out of New Mexico.
Stand up and shout out.
My name's Eric. I'm a freelancer out of New Mexico. Thanks for sharing. I was wondering just kind of what has been the hardest part of implementing this tool, and whether it's hardest or most frustrating. What have you had to kind of push after?
So buy-in from all the elected officials is the most difficult part. Before I became a judge, I was a city councilman for 10 years. So I've been in elected politics for a while. I understand this might sound odd, the political process of courts. All right, but the system is political in nature because you have elected officials, and all of them are worried about it. At some point, there's always that fear of what's going to happen if I make the wrong decision, right? From the judge's perspective, if I release somebody and then they end up killing somebody, right? That's the nightmare that we face. To those judges, I say, you know what you should do? Get a different job, all right? Because you can't eliminate that risk without doing serious injustice to your obligation as a jurist, okay? You're elected to apply the law and to make sound decisions and to do justice, not just be justice. It's to do. It's an action on your part. So buying in, and so what happened? We just had critical support. We reached a critical mass of elected officials, and then we shamed them. Fraternal shaming is a wonderful concept, and that's really how we accomplished it. Now, we're 2 years in to the MacArthur strategy. We still have one elected official that is not quite as engaged as we would like for them to be. But again, I think ultimately they're now supporting it sufficiently, and some of the strategies that we are modifying and coming up with are going to put them front and center that they have to. Okay, I'll put it this way. I wish we had the prosecutor that spoke from Philadelphia. If we had that prosecutor, oh my gosh, you should see what our numbers would look like.
All right, next
That's
slide,
all I'll
please.
say.
This slide is actually our CCNO inmate population count. As I mentioned, we reduced our sentence bed capacity, and so this dashboard allows jails to see their inmates that they have at CCNO, and if they need to make releases, they have information available to them to be able to drive those decisions. Next slide, please. And this is also another dashboard, and this is capacity for our electronic monitoring units, because judges need to have the information of, is there a unit available? You can't sentence a person to EM and not have an EM unit available for them to be sentenced to. That wouldn't work very well in our process, and so this dashboard was developed to provide that information. Next slide. All right, population review. This is probably our lowest tech strategy. I know Patrick is here from the MacArthur Foundation. He really likes our population review team. He highlighted it in a Safety and Justice Challenge newsletter. And what this really is a group of individuals coming together to review our pretrial jail population on a weekly basis. It's hosted in my conference room. We have a city prosecutor, a public defender, we have the sheriff's staff, we have representatives from the commissioner's office, representative from pretrial services, and my staff. And we sit and we have about a 100-page report. We look at each case. We always talk about who's in the jail and why. This is where we look at who is in the jail and why. And so during this meeting, we have access to the arrest reports, we have affidavits, we have case information, we have case outcomes, and we have plea negotiations going on between the city prosecutor's office and the public defender's office. If they reach a plea agreement, the public defender will follow up with the defendant in custody. If they agree to the plea, we have a bring-back order issued. They show up in court the next day. If the judge accepts the plea agreement, the person is released. We can save 2, 3, 4 weeks at a time by just going through this low-tech process. You will see we've been pretty successful. In 2016, we saved 1,100 bed days. In 2017, we have saved 1,800 bed days. The second component of this is looking at bond recommendations. This is slower. This is going back to the implementation of the PSA tool, looking at who's been recommended for release and who is still there. And then pretrial services will review the cases, and if there's a reason they feel that this is a good person to release, they will make the case to the assigned judge. So this has been a very effective strategy for us, and we have learned a lot. We've learned about our system, and we have been identifying trends. One trend we know we can do better with is sex offenders. Failure to register sex offenders can often be in our pretrial facility for over 100 days working through their case. I think we can do better than that in our system. Next slide, please. The second part of this strategy is the Opportunity Project. The Opportunity Project was developed by our public defender, and it's really looking at our felony arraignments. We have a 10-day window for felony arraignments. We're pairing case managers with public defenders to work on behavioral health related issues of these defendants in the system, hoping to connect them to services and help assist them with a better outcome for their case. This project is very, very new. It started, I believe, January 1st of 2018. And as you can see, we have been able to connect 126 individuals to services at this point. We're really looking to see how this impacts the resolution of their case. Next slide, please. And strategy 4, we essentially covered this under our strategy 1, pre-arrest deflection. However, I'm excited to announce that our diversion program started June 11th. And the very first week of operation, we had 27 individuals referred to the program. The very first day the procedural justice class was held, we had 3 individuals that showed up. So this was exciting that people actually showed up for the very first class. And the feedback was probably the best feedback we could have received. We had notes saying that they felt the system was listening to them. They felt that they had a voice in the system, and if you know anything about procedural justice, this is the outcome that you want. So we're really looking forward to continued results from this program.
Interestingly enough, of the 3 individuals that Holly was just mentioning, all of them had prior records. One had served felony time in the penitentiary. It had been 5 years ago. So none of them were, I think, the kind of individuals that we thought this program would represent, which is low-level misdemeanors that maybe were frequently arrested, but nobody had served hard time, felony time. And yet they took the opportunity and completed the program, and I was excited to find out how they described that effort, just that little effort they gave them, that we gave them as a system to say, hey, you know what, somebody's actually listening to me. It is now paying, I think, dividends down the road.
Next slide, please. And we keep going back to the fact that this is a data-driven approach. So both the diversion strategy and the deflection strategy was really driven by this slide here. What that black line indicates is our African-American population in Lucas County, which is 19%. You will see that second bar from the left-hand side. What that tells you is that African Americans represent 55% of our custodial arrests. So 55% of our African Americans are being arrested. Our population is only 19%. There's an issue there. What can we do to start addressing the disparities in our criminal justice system? And we really believe it's the front end of our system that's driving the disparities, because as you look through this bar chart, it becomes pretty equal as we move through the system, but it's that entry point.
Actually, the statistics now clearly demonstrate with the implementation of the PSA tool, their African Americans are being released the same degree as white Americans, and case dispositions are happening at the same frequency, that there's no disparity based on their gender ethnicity.
All right, next slide, please. The next strategy is coordinated probation practices. During our data review, we found that 30% of our population in our sentence facility were accounted for by a probation violation. That tells us we need to do something better with probationers. So we are really working on creating a better system for all 5 jurisdictions. We have 4 municipal courts, 1 felony court, and so we have hired a community correction planning board coordinator whose focus is coordinating probation practices throughout the county, and she is really working on bringing needed trainings on evidence-based practices, judges, and really focusing on increasing the competency of some of our suburban jurisdictions.
It's also recognizing, because we are data rich, that we should be sharing that data. So a good illustration of what this means is Maurice has a case in front of Judge Zmuda, right? And I put him on probation, and he's got to drop screens, and he's got to do all these conditions, community service, maintain his job. He also happens to have a misdemeanor conviction, and therefore he's on probation with a misdemeanor judge. And that misdemeanor court also has conditions which include dropping of screens, community service. He doesn't drop a screen for me, but he drops a screen for the municipal court judge. That's a bad move on Maurice's part, right? To not drop a screen for Judge Zmuda, because he knows he's going to prison now. Right, Maurice? Yes. Yeah. But the reality is there's only one place where they drop screens, in Lucas County. So why aren't we communicating and just having him pee once? He doesn't have to pee for me and pee for the other judge, right? But we never
Maurice,
agreed to share
water.
that information. And as a consequence, you're creating artificial, I call them artificial, they're technical violations, because he's doing it one place, but he's not doing it another. And what happens then is he knows, because he knows Judge Zmuda is a stickler for making sure you drop your screens, that I won't be happy when he sees me. So guess what? He gets scared, or he knows better that he's smoking pot, so it'll be a positive screen. So rather than face Zmuda, he doesn't show up, bench warrant is issued, and then the case just languishes, all because of a technical violation. And we hold too many people in jail on these bench warrants because he doesn't turn himself in ever. He just gets arrested, and then we're working on strategies to expedite those technical violations coming back to court and resolving them.
And the one thing I'll add, when you
No bill, yes, no bill warrants, absolutely.
And one thing to add, when you're looking at the implementation of the PSA tool, you have to keep in mind your failure to appears affect your score. So the more failure to appears you have, the more likely it is that you'll be held next time you do show up. You can skip ahead 3 slides.
I have a question, actually a serious question.
Sure, series.
Okay, so
Next one.
so Lucas County got money from MacArthur to do all this?
Correct.
How much money?
We received $1.5 million for a 2-year period. We have submitted a continuation application for an additional 2 years at that same amount.
Okay, and how did Lucas County get this money? Did MacArthur be like, hey, you guys want this money?
I wish. No, there was a formal request for proposal. We started with a planning phase. We were one of 20 sites selected for the planning phase. Emily, do you remember how many people applied?
192?
Patrick, how many?
192 jurisdictions applied for the initial planning phase. They selected 20. Then we went through a 6-month planning period with our TA provider. We were working with the Center for Court Innovation, who has really done an amazing job as our TA provider throughout this process. And they selected a first cohort of 11 sites for full implementation sites, and we were one of those initial 11 chosen for this $1.5 million award. Throughout the first year of implementation, they expanded these core sites to now be implementation sites, and all 20 of the original jurisdictions have funding to implement their strategies. And then they added on an additional 20 innovation sites who received, I believe, up to $50,000 for targeted projects.
Okay, so what is the CJCC? And did that exist before this money?
Yes.
The CJCC is the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. We were established in 1974. The board itself is 13 members, 6 county appointments, 6 city appointments, 1 police department at large. Both Judge Zmuda and Sheriff Tharp are members of the CJCC. I am their hire director. It is an agency. It's a special purpose unit of local government established as a regional council of government in Ohio. I have a staff of about 50 individuals. We have a pretty robust integrated data sharing system, and so I have a staff of programmers, network staff, small system staff. I have a 24/7 a day help desk, and then I also have a regional planning unit that works on criminal justice related issues. Okay.
Sure.
So let's say you get the 2-year renewal. Do you just keep going for 2-year renewals, or is there some point where the costs of these improvements have to be maintained by the county?
Well, actually, since we were first elected with MacArthur, we as a community have recognized that the success of the reforms can't be dependent on the largesse from MacArthur. And we have to figure out strategies that will allow us to sustain in some way those strategies once the money is spent. And we've been trying to do that over the last 2 years, and we certainly will be doing it if we're successful in the renewal of the MacArthur grant for the next 2 years. Okay, when you look at how the money has been spent, the majority has been spent in strategy 2. Because one thing I didn't say, when you release people, we've beefed up our pretrial service department. All right, just to manage that population, because there's more people out of custody than in custody, and how they're being managed is where we've spent dollars both with pretrial officers as well as with electronic monitoring units. Those are direct costs that MacArthur has picked up for us. But what has happened is we've been so successful with our pretrial services that we have now. I wish this was in the fall, because if we were presenting in the fall, I would be able to tell you that we are now providing all pretrial services countywide for all municipal courts as well as the county court. The municipal court had their own pretrial services. They had their own EM. They've now contracted with us. We're going to. I think by the end of the year, we'll be the only game in town, as it were. And because of that, we can then develop some strategies and some funding mechanisms that can supplant or replace that which we're using MacArthur dollars for.
Well, can you just, what funding mechanisms do you mean? Do you mean more taxes? Who's going to pay for this once the money from MacArthur ends?
I don't know that it's more taxes, but it's either general fund revenue from existing governmental entities, or it's grant dollars. The number of grants, especially with some of our specialized courts, for example, we have a drug court. There's a significant grant that they're applying for that we believe, if we have individuals in our drug court program that need pretrial release, that we can access those dollars to pay for that service, okay? If two of our municipal court systems that happen to not have a money problem want us to provide their pretrial services, we will enter into a contract and they will pay for that, so that, because they'll have their own pretrial officers managing that.
And also, I think I have 6 outstanding federal grant applications for upwards of $2.5 million. And when I say you need to know your criminal justice system, one thing you need to know is the cost of your criminal justice system. And so when you compare our MacArthur investment versus overall criminal justice cost in Lucas County, Safety and Justice Challenge is a really small component of that. And so it sounds like a staggering amount of money. I think we'll be able to find a way to offset that cost because we're showing the value of those services. And I do want to get, Sheriff Tharp has some really innovative programs for the opioid epidemic, so I want to save a few minutes for that. But I do want to mention our results really quickly. So this slide here shows our reductions through the first quarter of through the first quarter of 2018 of the Safety and Justice Challenge. We have reduced our sentence population by 24%, and we have reduced our pretrial population by 20%. Next slide, please. On this slide shows our average daily population. We have had a 26.3% reduction in our average daily population since our implementation. And our implementation is judged pre-MacArthur. It's a 6-month average. And then the final slide shows our a snapshot of our confined population. Our snapshot numbers based on the 30th of each month. And since our implementation, we've had a 21.7% reduction. And like I said earlier, I know we can do better. So with that being said, I would like to turn it over to the sheriff to give a highlight on his drug abuse response team, and we do have a quick clip to play from CNN on the project.
Before I get into that, we keep talking about locking up Maurice, but we don't have a jail to lock him up in, right? Because the jail's falling apart. The doors won't even close, so he could just walk out. It doesn't make any difference. So, but what we had to do is that we had to share with the community what our problem was. And there's no way that we could share with the community without the help of you. And so what we did, going right back with the editors, we invited them to send their staff over to take a tour of the jail and take photographs of the breaking pipes and the doors not working. And so they came over. But then our administration staff and myself went out to all the media and met with them and told them what our issues were. But we also gave them not only my cell phone number, but every one of my administrator's cell phone number. And then we went to that was the electrical media, to all the print media. We did the same. But I did share with them, I said, look, you're going to call me. And again, this was 5.5 years ago when I first became sheriff. I said, you're going to call me. You're going to have more information than me. So what I'm going to have to end up doing is telling you I don't have a clue, but I will get back with you. And please just don't start typing and putting on the computer or on the TV that just talk to the sheriff. He doesn't have a clue. Give me some time, and I'll give you some answers and some sound bites, and to move forward. The media has been absolutely awesome in our community. Every reporter in our community has my cell phone number, and so that's worked out very well. And they've been extremely courteous about that. The young lady was talking here earlier about you need to make it personal. You as journalists, you need to make it personal. You do need to make it personal. You need to know the people, first name basis, and know about their families, know about what their likes, their dislikes. Is when we talked with the reporters, we shared with them, look, we want to help you with your job. You're trying to make a living. You need to get sound bites. You need to bring something back to the station. If you don't, you're going to end up having problems. We will be open to you. We will do everything that we can do to help you keep your job because we know you have children and you're raising families, et cetera. So, that's worked very, very well in our community. So with that is that they came in, they took pictures, they photographed, they videoed. In fact, one of the electrical medias came in, and the elevators were so bad, we were going up the elevator, and the elevator broke down, and it just happened to be they had their camera on. We had to push them up the elevator in order to get them out, so they had that on TV on 11 o'clock news. The elevators were so bad, but that's what sold the community that we needed a new jail. And so all the people that we brought through, nobody has said, don't build a new jail, you can fix this one. But that is because of the media that helped us with that. So some of the initiatives that we've done is that we are, for the opiate epidemic, we're giving Vivitrol shots for individuals that are leaving the jail. They're getting Vivitrol shots. We also opened up a wing, and they're all people that are addicted in that wing. And we invited the counselors in, treatment agencies in, to work with them, and they're working with them every day. They come in. They have we have an open door policy for them to come in and work with these individuals that we have in the wing, so they can, when they leave the jail, they can hit the blacktop running by working with a treatment agency. They were going through group here a while back, and there was a man told me, he said, Sheriff, I was up listening, he said, Sheriff, I'm going to be leaving this jail in 2 days. I know I'm out of here. And he said, but I'm scared to death to be on the front porch of your jail because I know I'm going to go right straight to my dealer. And I know that that's going to get me right back in the issues that I'm in. I'm going to start breaking in homes again. I'm going to be doing these things. So a treatment agency met him on the front porch of our jail and took him right straight into recovery as he should have been taken to. So that worked very well. But talking about the opiate epidemic is 5.5 years ago. Is when 4 years ago in July, this month, is when we first started realizing opiate epidemic in our community in Lucas County. And the way it came to us in law enforcement is that quite often I come into the jail at night at 2 in the morning, 1 in the morning, just to visit and see how things are going, to learn about families, learn about issues, learn about problems that are happening. And going out and riding with the road patrol at 12 o'clock at night just to get to know the officers better. But every night that I would come into jail, there would be somebody that was going through detox in our booking area. And I'd never seen anybody go through detox. How many of you here have actually saw somebody go through detox? Yeah, just a few. But it is one of the ugliest things that I have ever seen. I thought I'd seen it all, from being a combat medic in Vietnam, the homicide squad, the narcotic squad. I truly thought I'd seen it all, but this young fella, he was clean-cut looking, 30 years old, could have been any one of your brothers or family members. He was screaming and yelling and vomiting and urinating on himself. His legs were flailing, his arms were flailing in the cell in the booking area. And I thought, good Lord, what is this? What's this all about? And next night I come in, and same thing is happening. And so the one fellow, that young guy that was going through detox, his legs were flailing. He accidentally kicked one of the deputies in the thigh so hard, I actually thought he broke his thigh. And the person that was going through the detox, he starts apologizing. He's screaming and he's crying. He's apologizing. I had never, in my 47 years, have never seen anybody kick a cop and turn around and apologize to him. I've never seen that. So I said, this has got to be somebody from a good family. Somebody's got to love this guy, right? Somebody's got to care for him. So check with the fire department. And lo and behold, the fire department says, we're going to these calls all the time. But what happens, now this is 4 years ago now. He said, what happens is that people are called, or they call in and they say, my daughter can't breathe. So the rescue responds, and then they take them to the emergency room. They find out it's an overdose. It's not that the daughter just can't breathe. They just shot up with heroin. Families don't want to say, my daughter just shot up with heroin because of the stigma, or my son just fell down the steps because of the stigma. So all the police or fire chiefs in our county told me that we will let the dispatchers know when these are overdoses. And so they did. And the numbers were so high, I couldn't believe it. So we had I'm thinking, what are we going to do? So we had a treatment agency from Renewed Minds. They came with me at 2 in the morning, 4 in the morning, 6, and talked to our road patrol officers and told them what buttons to push, what to say, what not to say to people that have overdosed. And I had told the officers, take them straight to detox. Get them into a detox bed. Don't even think about arresting them. Get them into a detox bed. So we found that wasn't enough because there was so many coming in. So the county commissioners agreed to pay for 2 officers to place them into this unit. And so they started responding and taking people to detox, but we only had 16 detox beds in our county at that time, 16. Those officers were driving people around for 2-3 hours waiting for a detox bed to open up. They would feed them, they would buy them food, whatever they could do so they could keep a hold of them. They didn't want to lose them. They didn't want them to leave because they knew they would go right back to the dealer. So we worked, the media worked with us and was right along and did a lot of articles and writing about the DART unit that we had put together and what we're doing in the sheriff's office. So the county commissioners agreed to put 2 more officers into that DART unit, Drug Abuse Response Team. So that's 4. So that's not enough. So I took a road trip down to see the Attorney General in Ohio. And to make a long story bearable here, I don't want to bore you to tears, but he agreed to bring in $800,000 to our community for recovery beds and for additional DART officers. And we put more DART officers in the unit. So other police departments at that time, I was getting so many calls from people that I worked with years ago in the narcotic squad. They were saying, John, why are you even pulling that needle out of that junkie's arm? You didn't put it in his arm. Why would you even pull it out? I said, they have family members. They're loved ones. They're good people at one time. They can be saved. We can do something with these individuals. So the unit started growing as other departments started placing officers in that unit to help us take them to detox and to respond to emergency rooms. So we're up right now to 18 deputies in that unit that are responding to overdoses and taking them to detox. We've responded to over 3,000 overdoses since we started the unit, and we have 80% success rate. And we measure our success rate by how many people we can encourage to go to detox and get them into detox. So with this, the officers in the unit, the sheriff can deputize officers from other counties or other cities, other police departments. And so in this unit is that this is kind of surprising to some people, but we have people, of course, from the other local law enforcement, but we also have park rangers as deputies in that unit that are responding. We have people from the library. Our library has a law enforcement agency. You would never think that a library would have a person in the DART unit, but we have deputies in the DART unit from the Lucas County Library. We also, our hospital, Mercy St. Vincent's Hospital, has a police department. They gave us an officer in the unit. The University of Toledo, our university, has a police department. Again, they gave us a person in the unit. So now we have, because of the media and the work that the media did to help us, because everything we did, every move we made, the media was there, writing about it, talking about it, filming it, videoing it, and talking about the initiative of what we were doing and how we were doing it. So there was a point where one of our state reps had asked for $5 million from the governors, from the budget, for police departments to emulate the DART unit throughout the state of Ohio. So they were able to receive $3 million. So 40 police departments received the monies to emulate the DART unit, the Drug Abuse Response Team. But when you divide 40 into $3 million, that's not a lot of money, but it's going to take them a long time to get to the position that we're at today, but we've been in it for 4 years, and that's why we have 18 officers. So some of the other things that we did with this, and then I wanted to show you a quick video, but one of the other things that we did with this is that we joined with our children's services. Children's services in every community has one heck of a problem of family parents that are addicted and the children have been taken away from them. So we had talked, and I don't want to say we had talked to, that's one of the things we need to get out of is I, right? So we had talked to the head of our children's services. They agreed to hire an investigator, and we'd ask them to be a certified peace officer, and then we would deputize them and put them in the DART unit and to work full-time with those families, and they would have the entire DART unit as a backup to help them. So that has been done. We're moving forward. We're going to the drug court is now waiting for a grant that has been submitted to have a full-time DART officer in the drug court as a compliance, to help with compliance, et cetera, to get them into treatment if they have overdosed, et cetera. And this one you may not even, this may shock you, it shocked me, is that I was in a meeting with hospice, and hospice is running into a heck of a problem right now with home care, et cetera, with leaving medication in the homes and people stealing those medications that are addicted. So we're looking to put a full-time officer with hospice to work with hospice. So that's going to put us up another couple, so we'll be to 20 in no time at all. So the officers, and I want to get to the video if you could think about, see if you can fire that up. So the officers that we have, they're compassionate. They had asked me when I first started putting the officers in the unit, what degrees did I want them to have? I said, I don't care if they have any degrees at all. I want them to be passionate. I want them to give it 110%. These officers are responding to overdoses in the middle of the night, 24/7. They could be at the family picnic. They're getting calls from people that are addicted and sick and they want help, and they're responding to them immediately. So there was a lady by the, you may know of her, Elizabeth Cohen. She's a senior senior medical reporter for CNN. She came into our community. She did a special on our DART unit and kind of gives you an overview of what our DART officers do.
For 19 years, I wore this uniform.
Charles Johnson has hung up this uniform for this uniform because of the opioid epidemic. As a deputy sheriff in Lucas County, Ohio, it's Johnson's job to visit overdose survivors in the hospital and try to save them. You're not there to arrest them.
No.
What are you there to do?
I'm there to convince them to live. I'm convincing them that they have a second chance.
Do you think it makes a difference that they see you in a coat and tie rather than a sheriff's uniform?
Absolutely, I think so. For you to go in a uniform, you can offer him all the help in the world. He's going to shut you down.
Every day, on average, 6 people overdose in his county.
They'll meet with their dealer up here in this parking lot, and that's where they'll shoot up right here.
On this day, Johnson gets a call to visit a woman in this Toledo emergency room. It turns out he knows her. She's a waitress in a local restaurant.
She's waiting on me and my wife there. I know her personally. These people are overdosing. They're your mailman. They're your neighbors. They're your friends.
More counselor than cop, Johnson promises that his team will drive her to detox.
Her and I made an agreement, and we're going to go for it.
We met at the hospital, and I was laying on that bed, and you showed up and gave me an opportunity, man.
Since 2014, Johnson and his team have convinced nearly 80% of overdose survivors to go into detox, an impressive number according to addiction specialists. You stick around in these people's lives.
You know what? I remember every one of their names. I stop in to visit their homes. I know their families. I visit them in the jails. It's like being a parent to 100 addicts.
You've been to jail 12 times.
Yeah. Every time I got out of jail, I went back to the same thing. Every single time.
Having Charles around, did it make it easier to come off of heroin?
He had faith in me, and he only had known me for 10 minutes. He was like, Cody can do this, he's got this, and he was staying in touch, making sure I was doing the right thing. You know, you working today? Yeah, I'm working, and that's what I like to hear, you know.
Does it take an emotional toll?
Oh, absolutely. You can get really burned out doing this. My phone never stops ringing. People are calling me 24 hours a day. I won't not answer that phone because someone's life could depend on it.
It's that commitment that's been making a difference in the overwhelming addiction epidemic in Lucas County. Elizabeth Cohen, CNN, Toledo.
I have to admit,
Something's going on at Schwab.
I have to share with you about we've had so much help from the community, and all this, like I said, has been all over the TV, the written media, the electrical media, but the fundraising that has been done by businesses in our community is just unbelievable. And they, for an example, I'll give you a couple of examples, is that we have a Louisville title company, and they came to my office and they asked me, they said, Sheriff, how much longer are you going to be in office? And this was a few years ago. And I said, well, at least 4 more years. And they said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to help you with the DART unit. Here's $10,000, but we're going to put on our easels and a sign up that every percentage of our closings will go to the DART unit for the next 4 years to help you with your DART unit. There's been block parties. There's been streets that have been closed down, a couple thousand people in the streets, and that money has gone to DART to pay for phones and to pay for fuel and to pay for all the additional costs that we have other than the officers themselves. We had car dealerships have given us brand new cars and numerous cars. And the idea, we were showing up in these black Crown Vic 4-door looking cop cars, the old Jack Webb. You guys are too young to know who Jack Webb is. It's an old show. One of the presenters were talking about doing wheelies, and I think all of you are too young to know what a wheelie is too. But anyway, they gave us brand new cars for us to be able to respond and take them to detox in these cars that do not look like cop cars. The last thing I want to say is that going back to my peers of saying, look, that's soft, John. That's soft that you're doing that. Well, here's my opinion, is that any one of us in this room, if we know that something needs to be done and we don't do it because we're afraid of being criticized or afraid that we're going to be considered soft, then I'm telling you, that's soft. When you don't do something, that's soft. So with that, I know we're probably going over the time, but thank you so very much for the media, and keep helping us. We appreciate you.
And I will say that to the question about where are we going to come up with $1.5 million to continue our work, I think I will just have the sheriff go out and raise $1.5 million through all of his contacts, because this gentleman can raise funds for his programs and good causes like no one else I know.
If I can mention, truly I'll be done, but we have a board now. We needed a 501c3, and we have a board, 6 very, very influential business owners and heads of corporations are on our board. And at our last board meeting, they said what they wanted to do, their goal is these board members, they wanted associate board members, so they want to identify 80 associate board members to be on the board for the DART unit. So, with that help, we're going to get there, because I know that money's not going to last forever for the county commissioners. They're paying for 9 full-time deputies in that unit. That's very expensive.
Any other questions?
So I'm reporting in Mississippi, and we're very technology adverse there. I once asked them if they backed out shooting data or anything like that, and they gave me blank stares and wondered how you could do that without a pitchfork. So how would I approach that in an area where we just don't have that technology? Internet is sketchy at best. How could you have done any of this without all the data you have?
I will say some of the other jurisdictions, and Emily may be able to comment on this better than I will, but I know other jurisdictions are at a much different level of data sharing and data integration. And so I know Charleston, South Carolina is working on creating a data warehouse that pulls together their various system level data. So I think it's taking baby steps. The first question I would ask in that situation is, what sort of case management system do you use? Are they still using pen and paper, or are they using an electronic format? If it's pen and paper, the first step is taking baby steps to automate. Then the next step is, let's try to integrate what we have automated. And it's definitely building blocks. And I will say we are not perfect in our data sharing. We know that our challenge is sharing probation level information, and it goes back to the way the booking information is tracked. So we're working on developing a way to better track our probation violators. So there's always room for improvement, but there are definitely baby steps that smaller jurisdictions or tech-adverse jurisdictions can take.
I don't know if we have any other, if any of you are in communities where there is a safety and justice challenge model. You're in where? Okay. Spokane. Yes. Okay. I wonder, as sort of a final question, so these are great. I mean, it's, listening to best practices, which is, part of our mantra as a center, and you're a best practice countywide in many ways. But as journalists, I mean, what do you think we should look at as metrics for when we're trying to figure out, well, how successful are you? Where are you going 5 years from now? What's the takeaway that you can offer some of the folks here?
Learn the system. You have to be as knowledgeable about our system that you're trying to cover. Otherwise, you won't be able to know what that question is that I need to ask. And then from that, once you understand the system and the connectedness amongst the players, is to be able to ask whatever particular area within that you're inquiring of. If you're doing a comparison and saying, okay, since implementing strategy X, if the community is saying we've reduced certain population, what is it before? What is it now? Where's the data to support that? Okay, that's sort of the general framework that I think you can undertake.
And to add to the general framework, just from the few numbers I presented today, for me, the first questions that come to mind is, one, what's your baseline? You mentioned this baseline. What is it? What are you using? I mentioned quarter one. What is quarter one? Is it general quarters? Is it regular quarters? How do you develop that number? And then it's, what's the difference between snapshot population versus average daily population? Because there's differences in numbers, differences in the way they're calculated. So it's just questioning the numbers that you're receiving. And I will say on the data end of things, we get data requests in all the time, and they're very broad. And the broader the request is, oftentimes we can't respond to it because we don't know what you're asking for. And especially when you're working with a public institution, if it's an overly broad request, we don't need to respond to it because we don't know what we need to respond to. So as media, as a reporter, you really need to hone in what you're looking for. And if you get a response back saying that's too broad, you need to do some digging and develop context to ask questions of, this is what I'm trying to show, what do I have to ask?
And there's also PJI, Sharice's organization, Vera. I mean, there's a lot of national organizations that have data nationally that if it's a particular subject that you want to do an in-depth study for a community, but you want to get a better perspective from other communities, it's just a point of reference that could help inform your inquiry, so that you have a better sense of what it is that you want to ask about the specific community you're covering.
Yeah, I mean, as criminal justice reporters, never have enough data. I mean, that's what we want to. We wake up with it, and we started out talking to begin with this today about what's driving the jail growth and what's the data that shows it. But I think the underlying issue, of course, is what's driving it even behind that. When you talk about the opioid crisis, what's behind it? I mean, and for that you have to look at the poverty data, the demographic data, the economics data, and that's a whole other issue. But I think that's something that's has to be part of the investigation.
Right. So knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it on your dessert, right? Isn't that right? Think about that.
That's something that Maurice could get arrested for.
Maurice?
All right,
you want me to answer the question about the opioid? Because it really is across all socioeconomic lines. And it's because of, it's really interesting, I think. Because it has to do with the cost. It's so cheap. It's cheap to make and therefore accessible. But the high that those that are addicted, and then the addictive quality to it. So it's the perfect storm of a really dangerous drug. And they keep modifying the manufacturing of it. So now it's carfentanil, if you've seen stories about that. Okay, and just the potency is so addictive that it doesn't take a long exposure to it before individuals are hooked. It literally is changing brain patterns with one ingestion of a heroin. So, any of you ever heard of a Lucifer party? Anybody know what a Lucifer party is? You all fail. A Lucifer party is where they literally overdose, and then they buy Narcan, and they want to revive because they say that high is the best high you could ever experience. So they call them Lucifer parties. And they happen all across our country. Okay? It's a virulent epidemic. And I think that's the best illustration I can think, because I was just shocked, and I said, oh, come on, you're not. But they do call them Lucifer parties, and it happens all across the country.
And to get to the why, I would highly recommend the book Dreamland by Sam Quinones, who is a reporter. He presented in Toledo. I know the sheriff's presented with them. But it's an excellent book authored by a reporter looking at the heroin epidemic. And then one other book, if you're really interested in criminal justice, and this is a book I read as part of, I think, a law school class, my or criminal procedure class. It's called Courtroom 302. It's also authored by a reporter, Stephen Bogaira. It's following a series of cases in Chicago. And there was, I think, a previous presenter that talked about humanizing criminal justice and humanizing the person in the system. He does an amazing job at humanizing the characters in the book who are real live human beings, real live cases, and you felt for these individuals as you heard their story and as they worked their way through the system. And to really humanize the system, following the approach that he used was very, very effective.